Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am Aaron, and this is the Inclusive Dad podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Duff McDuffie. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Why don't you just start me off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I am a hypnotist and a coach who works with neurodivergent people, especially entrepreneurs, creative people. And I am also autistic myself. I didn't know that for many years, though. I'm 45. I didn't grow up with a diagnosis or anything,
Mhm.
but it's the only thing that really explains my whole life and the path I've taken. So I love working with fellow neurodivergent folks and really figuring out how we can thrive in this world. So not just trying to fit in and cram ourselves into a box we don't fit into, but really be ourselves and our unique bring out our unique skills and talents and so on.
That's great. What is your definition of inclusion?
Great question. Great question. I was thinking about that before the podcast, and there's a lot of elements to inclusion. I think it actually even starts with including ourselves. So, of course, we can include others who have different brains, different ways of being, different races, different religions, all this sort of thing. But I think, especially for us neurodivergent folks, if you're autistic, if you got ADHD, if you got Tourette's, if you got, dyslexia, these sorts of things, whatever it is, you got a different brain. Usually, what happens is we end up internalizing there's something wrong with me, right? There's
Mhm.
something wrong with me. And that happened to me at a very young age. Like some of my earliest memories are thinking there's something really different about me and wrong,
Mhm.
because I'm very different than the other kids, even, in kindergarten, first grade, these sorts of things. So I really took that on and shut down internally. I think this happens for a lot of us who are different. And what I did is I went almost entirely mute most of the time. It's not like I
Mhm.
couldn't speak, it's that I didn't speak. And people, of course, said, "Oh, you're just shy. You're just shy." It's like, okay, well, why does it feel so painful? I'm just like
Mhm.
completely frozen in fear all the time when it comes to talking.
Mhm.
So it wasn't just shy and it wasn't just social anxiety. It was this level of just like deep shame about who I am.
Mhm.
And so to me, inclusion really starts with, yes, I'm different. I may be different from the norm. Of course, who isn't different from the norm? Who is normal? Like, like looking
Yeah.
around, like, who's the normal person, right? Is
Yep.
that someone who's 5'8" and, I don't know, what is this person? So, but first starting with including yourself, like, I am okay just how I am, even if it's very different than other people. Even if, yes, there's some things I can't do, right? I
Mhm.
have some disability, or there's something there's no ability to do that. But including yourself and seeing yourself as good, as the difference that you have is good.
Right.
I think this is really important for those of us who are neurodivergent, especially because we are different.
Yep.
We are different in some way. It's just a matter of what story are we telling ourselves about that difference over and over and over again? Are we telling a story of there's something deeply wrong with me that leads to feeling really bad and shutting down and not
Right.
really living a great life? Or are we telling a story of there's something deeply right with me
Mhm.
and I've got these strengths or I've got this unique perspective on life that is valuable. It's good for me, and it's good for
Right.
those around me.
Yeah. That is a great definition. I've not, in all the interviews I've done so far, nobody's ever given that one. So I like that.
Nice.
Yeah. That is, you said that it starts with like us internally. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
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 Cause if I can't, if I'm not even, if I'm not at a place to like accept who I am internally, then yeah, how can I accept others and include others?
Right.
That's a great,
And it is a journey,
yeah,
right?
it's a
It's
journey.
not that you have to be perfectly self-loving
Yep.
or compassionate or something. I mean, it's an
Yep.
ongoing practice for me too. But from my own experience, it's been possible to grow in that more and more. And so much of the messaging in this world is like you got to force yourself to do the things you hate. That's discipline. That means you're a good person, right?
Right.
And of course, there's some element of that maybe some of the time, but if that's how we live, then we're not really
Right.
focusing on our strengths. We're not really bringing out our natural joy and
Yep.
enthusiasm for life. So, luckily, there's a whole different way of doing things, which is like, okay, well, what lights me up?
Yep.
What brings me alive? can I connect with that more? And maybe that will, bring more joy and happiness into my life and the people around me. So yeah, it's an ongoing practice because of this messaging in the world, right? That we're not okay the way we are. We need to be different than we are.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
You stated that you didn't have a diagnosis till later in life. It's interesting. I've been coming across my guests recently where that's been kind of the normal thing now, where it's a lot of people finding out later in life. How did you get to that? What prompted you to seek it out, or how did that work out for you?
Yeah. I don't have an official diagnosis even today, and lots of people still don't. So there's a chance that I'm totally full of shit and or don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it's unlikely. I spent 5, 10, 15 years really like looking into it and being like, ooh, that at first actually it was too much. Like I would look at this stuff and people were starting to become aware of this and they're telling me and they're like, oh, it seems like you might be neurodivergent too. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be different. I don't want to be, have a label or anything like that. But the more I looked into it, I was like, oh man, this really hits home on so many levels. It explains my whole life. Growing up again, like I really shut down so much that I was not talking most of the time. And I didn't realize till later from another neurodivergent friend.
Yep.
She was like, oh, I had selective mutism as a child. And I was like, what's that? Let me go over to Wikipedia. Selective mutism. Oh no, I had that. And it's like, most people don't recover from this. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like for me, it was very challenging. It wasn't like I naturally grew out of it or something like that. Like I developed an autistic special interest in communication skills, in collecting techniques for emotional regulation, in and really working with this stuff. It was not easy necessarily, but I became obsessed with it. I became obsessed with like, how can I overcome this problem of social anxiety, is what I called it at the time, but it was really just being completely shut down and going to the freeze response whenever I was in a social situation. And now, of course, I'm on a podcast here. I talk for a living in some ways. I listen and talk. So it is possible to transform in ways that we don't even think necessarily are. Not to say that everyone will, or that that's what you have to do, but for me, I became just obsessed with this question of like, how do I learn to communicate with other human beings? And I was very, very awkward. I had no social skills. I was very smart, but people were like, "Oh, you're good at math. You're good at this sort of thing," which is great. But in terms of just relating to another human being and having a conversation, I couldn't hold one down. So. So for me, how did I find out? Well, I started looking at my whole life, and it was like, oh, I kind of got a PhD in masking. I figured out how to fit in with neurotypicals. By studying communication skills, by studying, emotions, and reading tons of books about this stuff and self-help books and all this, again, driven by this feeling like there's something wrong with me. I need to fix it. I went and studied all this stuff. And then looking back on my life, I was like, oh, this is the only thing that really explains my whole life.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is neurodivergence, and why is it not a disorder, disease, or disability?
Yes. So this is the way I think about it is there's different ways of thinking about being different. We can think about people who are different have a disability or a disorder, and this is sort of the main way that people think about things in our society. It's not that it's wrong to think about it this way. Like, if you're struggling with something and you can't get yourself to do something, maybe from executive dysfunction, right? That's what people talk about, dysfunction. And you're struggling to get yourself to do something. Of course, that's really painful, right? That's not easy to get yourself to do. So I'm not saying that you can't think about it as a disability or a disorder. You absolutely can. The only downside to that is then feeling there's something wrong with you. One of the interesting things therapists do, I think, is very paradoxical. Is whenever you go to a therapist, if you explain your problems, your challenges, they'll listen and they'll say, "There's nothing wrong with you," and then they'll give you a disorder and send you home with a disorder. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have a disorder. That's very strange. That's confusing, right? If there's nothing wrong with you, then how do you have a disorder? So when we think in terms of disorder, which we can, it starts to create shame. It starts to create like this feeling there's something wrong with us. We're not focusing on the strengths of that thing. So here's a funny example I like to give. But imagine there's two cars and they talk to each other. They're fictional characters, right? There's a sports car and then there's an 18-wheeler truck, and they're having a conversation. The sports car's like, "Oh, there's something wrong with me. I can't carry tons and tons of stuff." And the 18-wheeler's like, "Oh, but there's something wrong with me. I accelerate so slowly." Right? It's just two different kinds of cars.
Right.
And no, nothing's wrong with either car. They're just different. So we can look at difference as there's something wrong with you if you deviate from the norm. And this is how, the history of psychiatry has done things. Sometimes helpfully, many times not so helpfully, including, if you're poor, or if you're a woman, or if you're a minority group, then maybe you get a disorder because it's just deviating from the cultural norm. Or if you're gay in the 1950s, or even today, there's a lot of people who want to label gay and trans people and so on as having a disorder rather than being like, that's just a natural difference. So we can look at difference too as divergence from the norm, which might be good, might be bad, sort of neutral term, or even diversity. So neurodiversity or neurodivergence are different ways of looking at difference. And diversity is more like a rainforest. In a rainforest, there are birds, there are beetles, there are ants, there are plants, all sorts of things in the rainforest. If beetles are sitting around thinking, "Oh, I wish I was a bird. I can only fly a couple feet off the ground," that's not going to be very helpful as a way of being. And they all have a role in the whole system. And I like to think that way. Like, we all have a role in the whole system. We don't necessarily know what that is. Like, a beetle doesn't know what their role is in the ecosystem, but it just does its thing. And so we all have these different brains, these neurotypes. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, that your brain works differently. In fact, there may be advantages sometimes to having a brain like that. Like a sports car can go quickly, but it can't haul hundreds of pounds of lumber or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it for sure. Why do you think we look at it like that way? In your opinion, is it just all the things in the society that are built in where we see those differences and somehow turn it negative?
Yeah. The way I see it, there is kind of there's cultural norms, but there's also this whole thing I call the punishment paradigm. So the punishment paradigm is a whole philosophy. I was a philosophy major in college. Punishment paradigm is a whole philosophy that we all have sometimes. It's unconscious, but it's something like this: the best or only way to motivate ourselves and others is with fear and pain. So, for instance, if you do something and it doesn't work out very well, maybe you beat yourself up with some negative self-talk, like, "Oh, what an idiot," right? That's punishing. And in psychology, punishment is an attempt to motivate behavior change. So similarly, like a parent might try to punish a child to try to motivate behavior change, or a boss might try to chew out an employee to motivate behavior change, or a teacher might give an F to a student to try to motivate behavior change. The problem with that kind of thing, sometimes it works. Okay, sometimes it works. A lot of times it doesn't even work. It doesn't even get you the result you want. And it causes fear and pain to the person you're punishing. If you're punishing yourself, or even if you're, some people are animal trainers, right? You have a dog, you have a cat. You want it to change its behavior. You could yell at it. You could, use a shock collar, or you could use clicker training and, a treat. And that's a totally different way to try to motivate behavior change. It doesn't require punishment at all. Right? There's a classic book called "Don't Shoot the Dog" by Karen Pryor. It's all about this idea of clicker training and reward-based training in animal behavior, where they don't use any punishment at all. They don't use any fear or pain at all. And yet they get dolphins at SeaWorld to jump through hoops and do crazy stuff. And they can train dogs. If you've ever seen dogs in those kinds of like obstacle courses, I don't know what they're called, but that's all trained through clicker training and reward. No yelling or fear or pain. Which, as an animal lover myself, I would prefer that people train animals that way, but we are also animals, and we can train ourselves and shape our own behavior through love and joy instead of fear and pain. So instead of the punishment paradigm, we can paradigm shift into a whole different way of thinking, a whole different philosophy, which I call the progress paradigm. It's not the perfection paradigm, it's the progress paradigm. We're about just making little incremental improvements. And we can do that through joy and love instead of fear and pain. So oftentimes when I bring this up, people are like, well, that's the only way. I have to force myself to do these things, and that's very common. That's kind of where I was at one point in my life as well. Sometimes I'm still there. It's just when we're stressed, there's a deadline. There's, taxes. I'm not going to enjoy doing my taxes, Duff. Actually, I do enjoy them now. It's kind of weird. But, most people are operating from stress state most of the time, right? Most of the things we've been taught to do in school were punishment and reward based in a way that, we weren't necessarily invited to study whatever we wanted that was interesting. We were required to study things we didn't want to study. And at work, we're often forced to do tasks that we wouldn't necessarily choose if we had free choice. We're given that by a boss and so on. So most of our world is still designed this way, but that doesn't mean we can't start to design things in a different way within ourselves, within our intimate relationships, with any pets we have, with any, family or friends. And if you're a manager at work, you don't have to motivate through fear and pain. You can, talk to your employees and say, what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? What do you love doing here? And what do you not so much like? And start to select roles for people based on what they're good at and they enjoy. Imagine that. And when people are actually doing what they love, they put in extra effort for fun. So you don't have to try to, motivate people with a pizza party or whatever people are doing these days.
Yeah. That's great. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do in your business?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a few years ago, I was trying to figure out what my niche was as a coach. I've been coaching people for about 20 years.
Okay.
And I looked back at my top clients that I've worked with over the years, and I went, oh my goodness, I think they're all neurodivergent. I didn't even realize that. And I was going through a journey myself around my own neurodivergence and realizing my own identity there. And I realized that neurodivergent people who come to coaching often have the same kinds of challenges. Executive functioning, people can sometimes call it, although I just think of it as the productivity problem. The productivity problem. How do I get myself to do the things I want to be doing? Especially if you're a creative person, you've got some big idea. Maybe it's a business, maybe it's an art project, maybe you're going to record an album. I don't know. You want to create something and you're not quite doing it, right? You're not taking the action. What's stopping you? That's a lot of what I coach people through. So it might be procrastination. It might be fear of failure. It might be, problems focusing. How do you get just, in this world of a million distractions, social media, YouTube, all this stuff, like how do we just sit down and do some stuff sometimes? Or maybe it's, perfectionism. A lot of creative people, a lot of neurodivergent people feel like they have to go the extra mile just to be good enough. So we can work on that, level, transforming that. And, really what I help people do, though, is go from this punishment paradigm of fear and pain. So sometimes people have reached burnout at that point. That happened to me in my 20s. I started a few businesses with friends and they all just failed in a short succession. So I was just super burned out and depressed and, no energy, no motivation to do anything. Right. And that's part of what motivated me to create this whole other philosophy and practices that we can do that connect us with our joy and our love again, so that we, instead of burning out more and more over time because we're stressed chronically, we start to connect with what lights us up more and more over time. This is a practice. It's not necessarily an instant quick fix by any means. And I don't, fix people's neurodivergence. That is not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to cure your autism or ADHD. That's not a thing. Right. But we can change a lot more than we think. Just like I was at one point too scared to even open my mouth and say a word. Now I do public speaking and I'm comfortable with that. That was a long journey, and there's still edges. Like, if I go and I teach in a room full of 100 people, that's a lot still for me. I can do 40, but 100 is a lot, right? So there's always a growth edge of something that's not quite comfortable, and that's okay. And I support people in going there. And what I like to use actually is a combination of tools. So some things are more practices we do at a conscious mind level. But I am a hypnotist, and the reason I got into hypnosis was I found that a lot of the things that were out there to help with mood, with behavior change, with communication skills, were all this conscious mind stuff. And for me, at least, I was really up in my head. Still am a lot of the times. Right?
Right.
I'm a thinker. Doing is more challenging for me, but also the emotions and the mental process were not really very well connected for me. So, like I did some cognitive behavioral therapy, and I read Feeling Good, the new mood therapy, and I did all the exercises. And then I was like, okay, now I'm thinking more clearly, but I still feel really anxious. Right? I still feel really, sad and angry sometimes. So for me, I went deeper and learned through hypnosis and some of these other tools like neurolinguistic programming that there's all this unconscious stuff going on that's generating a lot of the feelings, the behaviors, the thoughts that we want to change. So there's all of these cool things we can do in imagination that start to change those. It's not necessarily any harder. It's actually, in many ways, easier when we use our imagination and we get into these more unconscious processes and bring things like love and compassion. So it's really practicing that on a deeper level, which then automatically leads to the changes we want, at least more easily, more automatically.
Interesting. Yeah. So do you do the hypnosis stuff just in person, or can you do it over video and stuff?
Yeah, actually, most of my practice since the pandemic is online on Zoom, and it works just as well. Yeah, at first people wonder if that would work okay, but I don't really touch people in person either, so we're just communicating with our words and our faces and body language and so on. There is some special magic for being in person that can never be replaced by video chat, but there is so much we can do online, on Zoom, on video that works fantastically well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting, just thinking about, because, I have a daughter, she's 22, her name's Cecilia, she uses a wheelchair, has diagnosed with cerebral palsy and epilepsy, and a lot of the schooling stuff. I also have a son, so for me, like, the school stuff is, why don't we at a certain age try to figure out what, students like or are good at, and then just tailor their learning towards that.
Yeah.
I mean, especially I would think, like, for the creatives, if you're into that stuff, like, learning the other stuff that we learn doesn't make sense. So just
right.
What are some things maybe parents can do? I mean, their kids going to school the way it's set up now, but they recognize, that's maybe not a super good fit for their child. What are things that the parents can do, like, at home to, like, encourage that creative side or those types of things?
Great question. Yeah, it's not easy for parents of neurodiverse kids or kids with disabilities and so on by any means. So I don't have all of the answers.
Yep.
That said, the more we can move towards less forcing your kid to do things, especially things that aren't going to work naturally for their brain, their body, whatever it is, and more bringing out, okay, what really lights you up? So, maybe it's Pokemon or something. Well, okay, well, fine. You can definitely do some Pokemon, but is there some other quality of that you can also bring into school that, brings some joy or some love or some excitement into what you're doing?
Right.
So, of course, there's a tendency we want our kids to succeed. We want them to make money and be okay and be happy and safe and all this stuff. So, all the forcing that parents are doing, I know is motivated by positive intention. It's an attempt to do that. The only problem is if you force your kid to do things they don't want to do for years and years and years and years and years, when you're 50, when you're 60, when you're 70, your kids, are they going to love you and want to hang out with you and have a great relationship with you? Probably not, right? So think about what's the quality of relationship you want to have with your child. And is this really leading in that direction? Again, it's not easy. It's not easy in this world for people with disabilities or for people with differences that are not part of the norm. I get it very much. And if we can, bring compassion, bring love, really, lean in. If your child doesn't want to do something, lean in with questions, with empathy.
Yeah.
Be like, oh, okay, tell me more. Why don't you want to do that? What's important to you? And maybe it's just, it's just too much, right? We give kids so much to do in school now. It's absurd, the amount of homework, the amount of projects, the amount of stuff we're asking kids to do. And so maybe it just needs to be dialed back a little bit, or, have some more support, whether that's tutoring or mentoring, or even the parent sitting next to them, right? There's a idea in neurodiversity and neurodivergence called body doubling. So body doubling is a strategy where when you're having a difficult time getting yourself to do something, if you have somebody sitting next to you while you do it, suddenly you can do it a lot easier. I use an online program called FocusMate to do this sort of thing all the time. You get on a video call, 25 minutes, 50 minutes, 75 minutes. You can schedule it. Someone else will show up and you say what you're working on, what they say what they're working on. And then you see each other on camera working. It just does something to my brain that says, oh, this isn't goof off time. This is work time. And that little bit of accountability at the end, I'm going to have to tell this person whether I did it or not.
Right.
That helps me to stay focused more than anything else. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought I was going to want to get on some ADHD medication. Nothing wrong with that if that works for you. But I found FocusMate and I was like, oh, this works as well to me as what I would hope to get out of Adderall or Ritalin or whatever. It's actually just, I need the social support.
Right.
So maybe your kid just needs social support while they study, while they're doing what they do. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. Almost everybody who goes to a job has social support. They go to an office. There's other people working.
Yeah.
Almost everybody who goes to a gym. Why would they do that when you can buy gym equipment and work out at home? Because you go there and your brain goes, oh, everybody's exercising. I guess it's time to exercise.
Yeah.
So there's little things like that when you figure that out and you figure out what works for your kid naturally with their brain, not trying to paddle upstream, but going with the flow of how their brain already works, then you can sort of unlock their own skills, their own strengths.
Right. Yeah, that's great. What things can we change about ourselves, and what things should we learn to accept?
A deep philosophical question, and it would take years to unpack, but I'll do my best.
Sure.
Yeah. So sometimes it's actually the same thing, ironically. One thing I found with my coaching clients and with myself, most people are more aware of their flaws than their strengths. So we're aware that we suck at getting things done, or we suck at athletics because we're uncoordinated, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But that same thing is often the flip side of our strengths. Just like the sports car and the 18-wheeler accelerates slowly, but that's part of the strength of being able to haul so much stuff. The sports car accelerates quickly, but can't carry very much. Those things go together. It's just the same thing. So what I encourage people to do, rather than trying to answer that deep philosophical question, I encourage you to look at your flaws and say, in what context is this a strength? In what situation is this a strength? Or a superpower? Some people hate the superpower term within the disability world, and I get it. Because disabilities are not a superpower. When you can't do something, that's very painful. Right. And there sometimes is like a perspective you have, or a way of looking at things that is really powerful or is really helpful. Even the person, who struggles in 95% of life might have just that, that other thing that's still really helpful. And even just being alive, right. You're valuable and worthwhile, even if you can't contribute to the capitalist world and the economy and all this sort of thing. Like, we kind of need to get away from that way of thinking. But in terms of what we can change and what we can't, let me see if I can give a real answer to that too. Which is, we don't necessarily know in advance. If we assume we can't change something, though, we won't be curious and look for possible ways to do it. Mm-hmm. So, like with hypnosis, I don't think we could change, a spinal cord injury or something like that, but you can definitely reduce the amount of stress that you're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And, neurodivergent people, we often have stress-based symptoms that we don't even know are stress-based, like things like migraines, things like brain fog, headaches, procrastination, all sorts of things, anxiety. We often don't even know these are stress-based until we start to reduce the stress in some way. We take up meditation or yoga or whatever it is, and then these symptoms actually decrease. So we think they're physical, and then they end up being, they are physical, but they're caused by the nervous system. So the real answer is we don't know in advance what we can and cannot change. But if we're open to possibilities, and we're curious, I wonder if I could change this. A lot of the things in my life that I've been able to change, it's because people have told me it's impossible to change. And I've been like, all right, it's impossible. So if I do it, that would be really cool, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So so sometimes my pathological demand avoidance or my reactivity has actually been in my favor.
Yep.
People say, you can't do that. Oh, I can't.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. What is one tip you can share to help our listeners be more inclusive today? So just something anybody can start doing today to be more inclusive.
Yeah. Look for the positive in difference, both in yourself and in others. So if somebody annoys you because they've got some difference, assume for a moment that they are struggling in some way, and that struggle, is something maybe you can empathize with. But then also look for the good in how they are as a human being. This has been a really helpful perspective for me. The more I accept my own difference and really focus on it as a good thing, I can start to see the differences in other people as well as a good thing, and to really take that in as valuable rather than something to try to exclude or get rid of.
Right.
But really include all parts of myself and include all parts of other people. That doesn't mean I always accept my own behaviors. Sometimes I need to change those or other behaviors of others. It's okay to give feedback, but to see the good underneath it.
Yeah, I love that. Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
Yeah, you can go over to my website, boulderhypnosisworks.com. That's BOULDER, like Boulder, Colorado. Boulderhypnosisworks.com. Get on my email list. I send a inspiring email once a week and teach classes from time to time. And I love also working with neurodivergent folks, coaching. So if you want to get some coaching, be happy to do that.
Awesome. Ready for the last question?
Yes.
Do you like spam lunch meat? Yes or no?
No.
No.
No spam, please.
No spam. Yeah, I live near Austin, Minnesota, where they make spam and where the spam museum is located. So if you ever want to visit that, you have to come to Austin, Minnesota.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just been weird question to ask everybody at the end to see what the answers are. It's usually
I love it.
It's usually strong yes, strong no, or I haven't had it. That's basically the three things I get. So
I actually have had spam before, but a long time ago on a Boy Scout camping trip. It wasn't too bad.
I mean, that makes sense too. That seems like a place people would have it or try it for sure. So.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
To those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered to be a champion for inclusion.